Donkey Kong's a weird guy. I guess he's been around for a while, and with age he's allowed to be a little weird, but Nintendo have given him a lot to do through the decades. He's been a villain, he's been the protagonist, he's been the damsel in distress, and he's even been the music man. It does feel like Nintendo think of an idea first and then say, yeah, stick a tie on it and let DK do it. So now Donkey Kong is back in the spotlight, it's time to rank every single last Donkey Kong video game where he isn't part of an ensemble like Smash Bros, or left behind on the shores of Japan as an exclusive. There's some bizarre games in here and over 4 decades to look over, so we're here for a while. You might need a snack. Imagine being a child in the mid-1980s and you tell your relatives that you really want Donkey Kong Jr. for Christmas. This message gets passed on to your dear old grandma whose eyesight just ain't what it used to be, and so you unwrap Donkey Kong Jr. Math. No, it's fine because it's the Donkey Kong that you know and love, but now you're adding numbers together and learning! Woo, I love learning! I first played this when it was an item of furniture in Animal Crossing, and it is just not really a video game. Honestly, not horrendous or offensive, but it's incredibly shallow and repetitive, and, you know, I don't want to learn. You may learn something, you may not. Donkey Kong Barrel Blast is such an unfortunate game. It's a racing game that was originally designed for the GameCube and to use the same DK bongos that work so well in the Donkey Konga games, but at the very last minute, Barrel Blast got shifted onto the Wii and the bongos were replaced by the Wii Remote and Nunchuck. So it should have been a racing game that you control with some bongo drums, but instead it's this waggle fest that is riddled with imprecise controls and some really sluggish racing. It's not really racing, it's like a slow stumble through an obstacle course, and I can't say I'm a fan. You'd have to imagine that the sequel to the original Donkey Kong arcade game would be serious business. Instead, it was a make-weight to help make the Game & Watch seem more appealing, and while that console had its moments, Donkey Kong 2 was not one of them. The Game & Watch was a cool piece of tech, but it was miles away from what arcades could do, and so Donkey Kong 2 made so many compromises in order to make this kind of game work on this system, and yet it kinda doesn't. It works for a couple of mini-games, but not something that is trying to be a full game. All of this may sound harsh, but don't call it a sequel then. Call it something like Donkey Kong Circus instead, because at least that way I'm guaranteed to know that it's some kind of quirky spin-off. Donkey Kong Circus sounds like a Mario Kart track, but instead it's a really simplistic Game & Watch title where Donkey Kong juggles pineapples and Mario laughs at DK when he fails. How you gonna make me root for the ape, huh? It's like you're asking for him to steal your girl. Donkey Kong 3 is a real historical oddity. Its existence legitimizes Donkey Kong 2 on the Game & Watch, which means that this series officially falls off a cliff and does weird things after the first game. Also, Mario was unavailable for this one, so instead you've got Stanley the Bugman in the starring role, and the role in question is to shoot DK in the taint with insect repellent. It is breathtakingly far away from the original Donkey Kong, and you can see why we never really saw Stan the Bugman again after this. He is a spirit in Smash Bros. Ultimate though. I'd be interested in tracking the use of the word amiibo in a game's title and if that game is any good. Amiibo Festival is the worst Animal Crossing game, and Mini Mario and Friends Amiibo Challenge is one of the worst Donkey Kong games. This one isn't horrifically bad or anything, but it is kinda pointless since you need to own amiibos to play it, but even then it's a really short, heavily diluted version of a Mario vs Donkey Kong game, and you should probably just play Tipping Stars on the same systems instead. Your time is better spent elsewhere. Like Donkey Kong Hockey, oh yeah! Yeah, I bet you didn't know there's a game where Donkey Kong plays against malnourished Mario in a frantic game of hockey. It's quite hard to mess up hockey, and this is surprisingly fun for what it is, with the puck moving faster and faster until a goal is scored. I would like a full ice hockey game starring all the Mario characters developed by Next Level Games and having the same kind of violence as the Strikers games, please and thank you. Donkey Konga is one of those you had to be there kind of games. I don't know who saw Dance Dance Revolution and thought that Donkey Kong needed a piece of this action. The first Donkey Konga was a smash hit and took the world by storm, but by the time that Donkey Konga 2 came around, it just didn't quite hit the same and felt a bit too repetitive. Plus the track list wasn't as good the second time around, but it did allow this to be a real thing that Nintendo created for the world to enjoy.
Somebody once told me the world is
You know what? I take it all back. Straight to number 1 it goes. Big Man DK really gets a chance to do some platforming on a handheld, which makes DK King of Swing stand out all the more. You use the shoulder buttons to grab these pegs and do some swinging through the jungle, which is a welcome shake-up for DK's repertoire. It suffers a lot from not having that extra game after this that helped to refine these mechanics, because honestly, if we had that, the sequel would probably have gone a little crazy with it, you know? Listen, this franchise is back, so we could do this now. Nintendo, what have you got to lose? Amiibo Challenge was bad enough that I didn't even feel the need to talk about Mario vs Donkey Kong in general, but luckily Tipping Stars is okay enough to make it worthwhile. These games are always good fun with a combination of puzzle platforming that is boosted a bit in Tipping Stars by being able to share levels with your friends. Other than that, it was a consolidation game, just more Mario vs Donkey Kong at a time when innovation was sorely needed. But hey, this was 2015 when Nintendo were making some real shit, so Tipping Stars being kinda mediocre is almost a win, really. We don't have to wait too long before talking about Donkey Konga 1, and it is hard to put into words quite how a rhythm game starring gaming's favourite ape, where you smack the shit out of some plastic bongo drums, goes down in real life. It is a lot of fun, if a bit imprecise and a little tricky to get used to, but this is also very indicative of Nintendo's mid-2000s obsession with screwing around with controllers. It's not something you're going to see or experience outside of, like, Taiko Drum Master, and it does deserve a lot of credit for being such a unique experience. I wouldn't mind another one tomorrow, I'll be honest. If these Mario vs Donkey Kong games start to blend together a little, don't worry, you're not alone on that one. March of the Minis is where the little Mario robots came in and where this side franchise veered towards more puzzle than platformer. Some of the platforming charm is lost as a result, and the general pace of the game is different instead of, like, being bad or slow, but at least March of the Minis is distinct enough on its own to feel like its own game. But also bonus points for bringing back Pauline for the first time in 12 years. Now she's in every game. You remember that time I said that DK Swing needed a sequel? Yeah, it kinda got one, since Jungle Climber for the DS picked up where King of Swing left off, but had 2 screens of course, so the levels are a lot more expansive. In general, there's been a lot more time and effort put into the level design here, and with the polish that this control concept sorely needed, Jungle Climber has some awesome moments in it. Yes, I did forget that this game existed when I talked about King of Swing earlier, but cut me some slack, I'm talking about 32 different games here. Some slip through the net occasionally. Do you want more Mario vs Donkey Kong? Well, too bad, because Minis on the Move is actually a Mario and Donkey Kong game, since DK has chilled out enough to team up with Pauline instead of kidnap her. The main thing going on here is that you can lay down tiles in real time to create a path for the Mario robots to travel across, which is a nice little shake-up that weirdly helps this game feel like a spin-off from this already kind of spin-off franchise. It's unique for sure and stands out, but it's lacking a lot of content, like they had one really good idea and then just copied it for a whole bunch and called it a day. Still though, it's good for a short puzzle now and then. The Donkey Kong Land games are effectively scaled down versions of Donkey Kong Country games, but for the Game Boy. In fact, Donkey Kong Land 2 is almost like a conversion of Donkey Kong Country 2, right down to a lot of the level design and boss fights, although some creative liberties have been taken so that it's more like a spiritual remake or port. That makes it a tricky game to rank, because it is effectively a handheld of one of the best Donkey Kong games, which is a wonderful feat of engineering, don't get me wrong, but it is also a little bit redundant, both now and even back in the day if you had an SNES. I can praise it a lot for the technical achievement, but there are better ways of playing Donkey Kong Country too. Oh yeah, it's more Mario vs Donkey Kong! What a great decision from me to include these as Donkey Kong games. Which one is this? Oh yeah, Miniland Mayhem, which is the one with the level editor and loads of side modes and was actually really polished for what it was. It's also impressive just how challenging some of the later levels become, because it is very beginner friendly, and I was worried that it would be a bit of a walkover. A surprisingly solid video game, really? They just don't make games like Donkey Kong Jr. anymore. Yes, it does cast Mario in a shockingly villainous light and implies animal cruelty, which would explain Mario's reckless treatment of Yoshi's over the years. You mean to say it's canon? So in the universe where Grandma isn't blind, Donkey Kong Jr. sees you play as DK's child, I think, and you rescue him from Mario, which is very refreshing to see, and I want Mario being the bad guy more often. It plays like a slightly less refined version of the Donkey Kong arcade game, but at least climbing vines is cool. Oh damn, he's moving. Oh yeah, we have to talk about the original Mario vs. Donkey Kong, which absolutely shows how far this little sub-series has come. It's bizarre looking back on this game since you're controlling Mario, the plumber made of meat and bones, rather than the little robots, and this is firmly a puzzle platformer, and arguably more platformer than puzzle game. It strikes a really satisfying balance that was in fact so satisfying that it got a remake on the Switch 20 years later, and sure enough, it's just as good as I remember it. 9-year-old me had some taste, I tell ya! Donkey Kong Jungle Beat might just be one of the most insane video games I've ever played. If you just saw footage of this, you'd think, oh, that's cool, it's like a more modern Donkey Kong Country with some wacky level design. And yeah, it kind of is. That level design is so good that some of these ideas were reused when the same studio made Super Mario Galaxy after this. But this is the game designed for the Bongo Drums controller. It's not mandatory and is merely compatible, says the box art, but they clearly want you slapping out some delicious rhythms on your plastic drums, all in support of a platformer rather than a music game. It's an incredibly involved video game, and if you are using the bongos, not only are you treated to an unbelievable video game, you will be sweating inside about 5 minutes. You don't need Wii Fit, just give this a whirl. You can tell that Rare were responsible for the Donkey Kong Land games because the longer that company spent with a concept and hardware to imagine said concept, the more likely it was that something amazing would be made. Donkey Kong Land 3 is again like a companion to Donkey Kong Country 3, but with more original ideas and the confidence that comes with making 3 2D platformers for the same console. The Game Boy may have limited technical prowess, but Rare made it work hard, and the end result is some gorgeous sprite work and ambitious level design. It did come out right at the end of the Game Boy's lifespan though, and feels like one last celebration of not just the Game Boy, but also the country games in general. A very underrated game. Rejoice, dear viewer, because we found the best Mario vs. Donkey Kong game, and we don't have to mention them again, because Minis March Again is as good as this franchise became. What I remember the most is the community-driven stuff, since level sharing was rampant, and some of the creativity shared by other players was worth the price of admission on its own. Even away from fan-made levels, Minis March Again is just really well constructed and absolutely rammed to the brim with content. The fact that the servers are long dead now is an issue, but even then, the offline stuff is still great. It's like the precursor to Mario Maker, and I love it. I have to explain to you just how much witchcraft was on display when Rare made Donkey Kong Land. Donkey Kong Country is already some crazy achievement for how spectacular the graphics are and how this game is able to stand out so much with its own unique art style, but I have no idea how Rare were able to get this game on the Game Boy. Yes, some compromises were made, and of course it's not just a remake, it has its own ideas, but you need to realise that Rare put out one of the best NES games only to follow up with a stunningly realised almost port of the same game, but now you can take it anywhere. How large are these people's brains? I feel like Donkey Kong 64 has the most variance in how people feel about it. It is very divisive, with many seeing it as a huge, ambitious 3D platformer that has Rare's stamp of quality all over it, and feels like the culmination of what they've learned from Banjo-Kazooie. You have loads of different Kongs to play as, and there's genuinely so much to do in Donkey Kong 64 that you're not going to be done anytime soon. But that's kind of a problem too, because the bloat is here and it is real. Collecting all these different colored bananas and the coins and the keys does feel like a chore at times. It is often too much to be enjoyable for the entire duration, but the charm still seeps through at every opportunity. It gave the world the DK rap, so it's a special kind of perfect, really. Kids today will never understand the headlines that were being made in the late 2000s when Nintendo announced that Donkey Kong is back in the best way possible in Donkey Kong Country Returns. It's got a bit of new Super Mario Bros. About it, since the marketing team leaned heavily into this game being a return to form for Donkey Kong platforming, and Retro Studios did a stunning job at recapturing that feeling. It is a wonderfully made game full of incredibly iconic moments, but it is also a Wii game with shoehorned motion controls, and also a difficulty curve so savage that it obliterated new players and arguably came too late for veterans. It is still 100% more Donkey Kong Country than we had in the previous 13 years, so I ain't complaining. And before Returns, the last Donkey Kong Country game we had was Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, which was still a hell of a way of going out. Rare were cranking these out. Alongside the Donkey Kong Land games, it was 2 of these a year, and the best thing I can say about Donkey Kong Country 3 is that it still feels as fresh as ever. Changing the focus character to Dixie Kong helps for sure, but the non-linearity is something wonderful that keeps you coming back again and again. It is an admirably consistent game with very few moments to bog it down. What a way to end a trilogy. What can you honestly even say about the original Donkey Kong Country other than how is this game 31 years old? It single-handedly shifted expectations across the board for how good 16-bit games could be, and visually, it's still one of the most stylistically gorgeous games ever made. Like, it's not hyper-realistic or anything, but fuck me, it looks good, and Dave Wise on the soundtrack is doing a madness to keep everything as atmospheric as possible. All these years later, and it isn't quite as polished as you might remember, and some games have surpassed it, but it is still a quintessential part of Donkey Kong's history, and a game that won't steer you wrong. The attention to detail is off the scale. If you want any one thing to take away from this video, it'll be to start living your best life and finally play Donkey Kong 64 for the Game Boy. What starts out like a fancy remake of the 4 levels of the original arcade game quickly explodes into this shockingly expansive array of more than 100 levels. This is effectively the precursor to the Mario vs Donkey Kong games, but with the focus being almost entirely on platforming, and I'll tell ya, those 100 levels will fly by without even a passing moment where you might think that these are getting repetitive. Also, the music goes unnecessarily hard for a mid-90s Game Boy game. I don't know who signed off on an 8-bit guitar solo, but they need to do it a lot more often, please. Just for me. Oh, you know we're playing with the big boys when Diddy Kong Racing rolls into town. A racing game so good that the worst thing about it is the 2 cancelled sequels. Well, and maybe the remake on the DS, which is okay, but isn't quite able to match up against one of the best and most iconic racing games of all time. In an era where Mario Kart had a larger share of the market, Diddy Kong Racing set itself apart as a game that, yes, is mechanically tight as a drum, but also one that has so much more freedom with what the player can do. It has a hub world, and bosses to defeat, and hidden areas to discover. Like, it took Nintendo another 28 years to do this with Mario Kart, and even then it's a shadow of what Diddy Kong Racing was. How have they turned a title that screams cheap party game into something that people are desperate to have a sequel for? Transformative as fuck. Series debuts are notoriously hard to rank against modern games, and from a technical standpoint, the original Donkey Kong arcade game has no business being the 4th best Donkey Kong game. However, you can't just introduce both Donkey Kong and Mario, and kind of the concept of a platformer in general, and go about your day like normal. There's no escaping the fact that this is one of the most important video games ever made, and yet it's also quite good, where are we, like 44 years later. You have a clear goal, everything is elegantly designed, and it's shockingly replayable. It is challenging, but you have enough time to see every hazard and how it behaves before it's on top of you. You can beat it in 15 minutes if you know what you're doing, and still have a great time doing so. That's a miracle of a debut. Holy crap, is Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze an astounding game! The standard in this video is now through the ceiling, and in Tropical Freeze we have one of the best 2D platformers of the modern era. Donkey Kong Country Returns was some sturdy foundation, but Tropical Freeze is Retro Studio turning everything up to 11. The variety is outstanding, giving you tons of different locales to visit, but also some extra super hard levels that stretch experienced players to breaking points. Trust me, I've been there. Plus we've got Dixie and Cranky Kong as additional playable characters, which gives you even more moves to get to grips with. This is the game that I thought would usher in a new age of Donkey Kong platformers, because this is such a high standard to keep. Don't close the door completely. To the uninitiated, seeing Donkey Kong Country 2 above the original might be a little perplexing, since the original gets all the credit, and is the one that everyone feels nostalgia for. However, this is Diddy's conquest, and that monkey takes no prisoners. Everything that was good in the first game is now even better, with refined graphics and a more gorgeous soundtrack, and every level is now sharper and with even more creativity put into it. It's Rare having found their feet, which often produces works of art, and Diddy's Conquest can rub shoulders with the very best games on the SNES. This is platforming royalty that stretches your skills without punishing you too harshly when you do die a lot. My boy Diddy is a certified star. Call it recency bias if you like, but for real, this game is everything I could ever ask for, and if anything, I feel like I need to give back now in some way. What did we do right to make this happen? Was there enough of a hole in the market that Donkey Kong Bonanza was perfectly poised to waltz right in as this pseudo-sequel to Super Mario Odyssey and supercharge Donkey Kong into being one of Nintendo's most culturally relevant characters all of a sudden? You know, I nearly bumped this one down one place because I'm in the post-game now and the Zebra Bonanza transformation is so janky at speed, but there are just an ungodly number of series highlights in here that it does counteract any major problems that I could possibly have. The ending is one of the most satisfying send-ups to fans and the franchise's history that you could ever dream of, and I'm still not completely over it. I pray that this awareness of what fans want will continue long into the future, because I want more moments like this. This is the game that Donkey Kong 64 wanted to be, I'm sure of it. Just look at my gorgeous boy. Protect him, Nintendo.